Greetings. This is San Francisco 1999, and I'm Neil Cavan. I'm an artist and a performer, and I was there on the San Francisco Bay Area scene during the last days before smartphones and social media. And I host conversations here with guests who recollect what life was like back in the before times. The folks who are sharing their stories each week in conversation were then, and still are, vibrant contributors and participants in the co-creation of San Francisco Bay Area arts and culture. The majority of the esteemed guests are folks that I know from that time and or had the pleasure of working with back then, perhaps are still my colleagues now, many of whom I have the honor of considering my good friends to this very day. You can join the conversation by leaving a question or a comment at sanfran99.com. Okay, welcome back. It's episode 3, and I got a chance this week to talk once again with Jonathan Youtt. And this time we are going back to talk about the history of cell space, specifically the role of art and activism, also known as Artivism, and art spaces and their role in a peaceful revolution. So we are joined once again by Jonathan Youtt, one of the founders of Cell Space. And here we go. Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Neil. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, likewise. And we are back, continuing on from the origin of Cell Space Part 1.
Yeah, I think it's important to see Cell Space in sort of like the legacy of community art spaces. And I say that because, it didn't happen in a vacuum, right? I think across the world, there are examples of these types of things. And, it might be as simple as like a Zocalo in Mexico, which is the town square where a lot of activities happen. But this, or squats in Eastern Europe, a lot of people who came through Cell Space were like, wow, this reminds me of a squat in Berlin or a squat in Amsterdam. And I think it's important to understand that this is part of a legacy of and a movement, right, that has evolved for decades. And that Cell Space was dynamic because it was the largest of its kind for the Bay Area, but it was special because it was happening then, but it was also part of a legacy. And, shout out to 848 Community Space, which was a much smaller space. It was 1,000 square feet, right? A tenth the size. But the things that they were doing were part of a larger movement, and they were around 10 years before Cell Space even was an idea. And then they evolved into Counterpulse. And so they became Counterpulse. And then they moved to a different location for a decade. And then they got sort of supported by CAST, the Community Arts Stabilization Trust, which was founded specifically to help art spaces get secured properties, buy their properties. And they wound up being the second of this sort of lineage of CAST-supported spaces, where CAST bought the property. It was an old porn theater in the Tenderloin. And then they renovated it, like $1 million plus.
Wow.
And then they held on to it, rented it out to Counterpulse, until which point, and this is always part of the plan, Counterpulse could actually, was financially stable enough to then make the purchase from CAST.
Oh, that is very, I didn't know anything about that. When did that whole thing happen?
I think that happened about, maybe 10 or 12 years ago.
Right.
The first project that they actually helped secure was the luggage store. And that was Daryl and Lori. They're the ones who put on the In the Street Theater Festival. And that was in the Tenderloin. And so they were, again, another community art space. It was on the second floor, mid-market. And they did programming, they gallery space, shows. There are some interesting sort of central themes that these community art spaces always revolved around. And it was always some type of visual art. either on the wall or as a presentation as part of their events. And
Yeah.
there was always events, right?
Yeah.
Some were large enough that they could offer art making facilities, right? But that was like a luxury, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these spaces just were four walls. There was a group, there was actually 1,800 square feet was another space, of four walls was another space, um, where they literally just had four walls. And the programming that happened was largely around, okay, you can use the walls to put art on,
Mm-hmm.
and you can use the empty space to do events. And those events ran the gamut. The reason why I think Cell Space was impactful was because we secured such a large
Yeah.
space that we not only had the gallery up front, like those other art spaces before us,
Right.
we had the event space, which wasn't just 1,000 square feet, it was 4,000 square feet.
Yeah.
And then we had the 5,000 square feet in the back, which was basically broken up into smaller spaces by artistic discipline. And that was kind of a predecessor of what became the maker space movement. That combination of where the art was made and where the art was presented,
Mm.
and where, cross sort of genre art making, and art showing was just kind of a happenstance because of the architecture of
Yeah.
the physical property.
There were individual art spaces or studios within Cell Space as well.
Yeah, we added over time. We started adding more spaces on the second floor, and then we made like a third floor, and we did move away from the only use those spaces for artistic disciplines for shared spaces.
Mm.
They became individual artist spaces. They became offices for some of our programming. We did a lot of programming for young people, which was honestly our saving grace,
Mm.
because being operating an underground space for 5-6 years, at a certain point the city, the police actually were like, over it, and they wanted to shut us down.
Mm.
And it was a multi-department sort of decision on how to shut us down. And
Wow.
every other department in the city of San Francisco was like, we're not going to touch this. And the reason why they weren't going to touch this was because they knew that the Mayor's Office of Community Development had given us a grant to do youth programming. They knew that, the Mayor's Office of or Grants for the Arts was giving us 10% of our annual budget,
Mm.
and that was generating yay much economic activity. They knew that the Mayor's Office of Children, Youth, and Their Families was also supporting us. And so at that moment that the police were hating on Cell Space and basically shut us down.
Why did the police? Why were they so anti?
Well, I would say that it was largely because we were actively supporting the youth of color by
Mm.
allowing them to gather, to
Mm-hmm.
organize,
Mm-hmm.
and to showcase their work. It was a
Yeah.
threat to have, in the age of Bush,
Yeah.
where the Patriot Act had just been passed. They were
Mm.
shutting down a lot of cultural spaces. They forced the leadership of the Mission Police Station out and replaced him with a 35-year veteran in the Vice.
Super relevant with all of the defunding that's going on and all of the anti everything that the current administration is, waging war against the arts and education and community spaces and, everything. I don't need to elaborate much more than that. We all are experiencing what's happening. But I hadn't thought about the Bush administration and their agenda and how they were using the Patriot Act to dismantle and attack the arts and persons of color communities and whatnot.
I think certainly that whole era was a buildup, right? Because in 1999, Cell Space actually was the place where a production was built that then went to Intersection for the Arts, and it was all about the Redwood activism that Julia Butterfly Hill and David Gypsy Chain and all of these, forest activists, because Redwood Summer was 97. So what we had was a junk bondsman, you know, um, basically taking over a family-owned business, Pacific Lumber, that had a sustainable harvest plan where they only cut 1/100th of their stock, and this junk bond dealer basically leveraged a bunch of equity to buy out the company. And long story short, the forest activists went up and tried to defend the forest, climbed the trees, refused to get out. So we at Cell Space built this show, and we then mounted it at Intersection for the Arts Theater. It
Where
ran
was
for 4
Intersection
weeks.
of the Arts Theater?
That was on Mission between 16th and 15th,
Mm-hmm.
and it was more of a black box theater.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Michael Franti. We met Michael Franti because he went up the tree, talked to Julia Butterfly Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like, down in your city, these artists and puppeteers and theater people have done a show that about this whole movement, and I call in on Friday and Saturday nights, and I answer questions from the theater audience.
It's amazing.
And so Michael met us because he's like, yeah, Julia Butterfly Hill told me I should meet you guys.
Wow.
Anyway, so the whole point is that was 97 leading into 99. This whole movement was like, there was a corporate takeover, really, is what was happening. And then I was part of another group that, we hosted a lot of builds and things at Cell Space for Art and Revolution.
Yeah.
Art and Revolution is still kind of David Solnit, who still does this similar kind of work, doing large scale puppets, doing large, silk screen signage, pageantry, right? Mm-hmm. And we became the group that put out the first postcard that said, "Shut down the WTO."
Wow.
And that was what we sent. That postcard we sent to student groups. We sent them to labor organizers.
Yeah.
We sent them to community-based organizations. We sent them to NGOs. And we're like, hey, there's a corporate takeover of international politics, and it's through the guise of the World Trade Organization. So, organize and get your asses up to Seattle in the end of 1999 for November 30th. There's a big action.
Was in what year was WTO?
1999.
Holy moly.
So this is before Bush got selected, not elected, because that was when the Supreme Court decided to just, put him into, or decide the Florida results instead of just having a recount in Florida.
That's right.
So the selection happened of Bush, but that was 2000. But before that, like 99, was this World Trade Organization, which was like the largest sort of statement to the rest of the world that the American people didn't even believe in the capitalism that was being espoused by the World Trade Organization, model. And so, yes, the Bush administration, 9/11, the Patriot Act kind of ramped up the resistance for sure. But prior to that, we were all organizing for freeing Leonard Peltier. We were organizing for freeing Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Yeah.
We were organizing against, the corporatization of everything through the World Trade Organization.
The whole neoliberal
agenda.
Yeah.
For sure.
Activism was a big part of social gatherings at that time.
Absolutely was. And I think also it was, a lot of the resistance movements utilized arts as a tool, and always has.
That's right.
Certainly the anti-war songs are what a lot of people recall during the, any of the movements, right? The folk, the the hippie, even hip hop is got rebellious, sort of counterculture,
absolutely,
sort of ethos behind it. But that artivism, was very pervasive. And like I said, not every artist had that sensibility, but all political movements, I think historically, have used arts to their, to their benefit, and
Yeah.
and the movements benefit from having the arts. There's an expression or a saying or a quote. I think it was credited to Emma Goldman, who said, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution."
That's right.
And it just goes to the the underpinnings of building movements. Like you got to get people interested. You got to get people motivated. And too often people talk about the struggle. Oh, join the struggle. And you're like, why in the world would I want to join a struggle? Whereas if you make it fun and you create a pageantry and you use art and music to like convey the world you want to live in, you're going to get a lot more people to jump on board than if you just constantly remind them that it's going to be a struggle.
Right. When after 9/11 and we all took to the streets saying no war, like around the entire world, it was like that they did it anyway, that they invaded Iraq anyway, was like a real wake up, because we were already believing that taking to the streets was going to stop it from happening.
Well, it's interesting taking to the streets, because right now we're seeing specific cities take to the streets to kind of resist ICE and its brutal, sort of like tactics against innocent people.
Yeah.
And what is making the news as more than anything else is Portland and dressing up in costume and having the musicians playing the Darth Vader theme and the Benny Hill theme, when the Keystone Cops come out, right? Like this, again, is the rebellious artists that are making headlines. Not only making headlines, but they're also keeping things calm.
Yeah.
And because we know for certain that that dominant sort of authoritarian regimes basically create the conditions to justify coming in with martial law.
Yes.
And that is exactly what's happened back then. It's happening on steroids now, where you're sending in the red state National Guards to blue cities and just trying to get a rise out of people. And it's the artists and the pageantry that can keep the peace, because this movement will only win if we keep the peace. If we go the way of the Black Bloc and fight, that's what they're calling Antifa.
I know,
right? I mean, it's ridiculous because it's not a thing. It's like, but it is been used to justify like sort of criticism around protesting, because they break windows, right? And there's a whole debate about that. But if you're not even in a position to be breaking shit because you're making shit, like that's where the artist's role as a sort of a catalyst for creative resistance keeps everyone's calm, keeps them engaged, and keeps the peace. And peaceful revolution is the only revolution that's successful.
Jonathan Youtt, thank you so much for your amazing stories and your ability to go back in time and bring these things forward.
Awesome. It's been an honor. Thank you so much, Neil. Excited for the ongoing archival storytelling significance of this era.
All right, my brother. Take care and have a good night.
All right, then.
Peace. Much love.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to San Francisco 1999. We'll be back next Friday with another episode for you. Subscribe to this podcast so that you get notified. And if you'd like to join the conversation, you can go to sanfran99.com, leave a question, comment, sign up for the newsletter. And hey, before you go, remember this: you are making history. You are part of history. You are part of culture. And so my hopes and my wishes for you are that you find ways to express yourself creatively and engage in the communities and the cultures that you are passionate about, and be a part of making something happen. Until next time, take care and much love.